Questions, then please feel free to ask anytime. I do intend to do something similar to what I've done these last couple of Wednesdays when new information comes out. I'll say, hey, we're going to have a meeting on a Wednesday night or something like that, and I'll just share it with whoever wants to come. So know that. I will try to make sure to be as transparent as possible. You're welcome. I would want it myself, and so I'm trying to do it. Okay. Scriptures are holy, and before we consider them, we should pray. Let's do that together. God, we're grateful today for the opportunity to be here to study, to learn, and to grow as we seek to better understand who you are by learning about what you've done. Pray that your Holy Spirit would open our hearts and our minds and our spirits, that as a result of our time together, we might know you better. And this we ask in your name. Amen. Chapter 31. All right, so we're continuing in the saga of Jacob and Laban and the issues that they're having with one another. Jacob is now ready to leave, and we're going to see an interaction between Jacob and Laban that I think serves as an interesting entrance into how legal issues would have been handled at the time. So let's just go ahead and dig in since we're already kind of late in our time together. Chapter 31. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob took everything our father owned, and from it he produced all of this wealth. So Laban's sons are upset. And part of the reason that they're upset is because they're concerned about their inheritance. They don't want part of their inheritance going to Jacob. They want the inheritance to remain with them. Is that greed? I honestly, probably not. Because you've got to account for the fact that your survival and the survival of the Bedab, you remember that word? Bedab, B-E-T, space A-B. It's the family structure, the family unit. The survival of the Bedab you're going to be responsible for is directly dependent upon what you inherit. And so they're not just being greedy, they're concerned because they've already been working to kind of build their own family structure that they will then be in charge of when their father gives them their inheritance. And now they're looking at what they have projected that they're going to have to take care of, and a dwindling inheritance that's much less than they thought that they were going to get. So you're not just talking about greed here, you're talking about practicality. Jacob saw that Laban no longer liked him as much as he used to. I'm not sure, honestly, that Laban ever did. I think Laban was using Jacob. Then the Lord said, and okay, so again, when you see Lord, capital letters, that is Yahweh. Yahwist is probably writing that, but that should be translated in your head to Yahweh. When you see God written in Genesis, translate that to El or Eloya, which is the singular version of Elohim. So then Yahweh said to Jacob, go back to the land of your ancestors and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Yahweh has already promised to be with Jacob on his previous journey. He is promising to be with Jacob on his future journey. Why does that matter? Because one of the most perilous things you can do in Jacob's world is travel long distances. Not only is the terrain and the weather something difficult to navigate, so is the distance itself and the possibility of bandits on your journey. So traveling is really dangerous. It is, in fact, because of the danger of travel that the hospitality laws we've talked about in ancient Israel and throughout the Arabic communities developed the way that they did, so that you can rest assured that if you find access to a settlement, you'll be taken in and taken care of. You could be in dire straits when that finally happens. Verse 4, so Jacob sent for Rachel and Leah and summoned them into the field where his flock was. He said to them, I'm aware that your father no longer likes me as much as he used to, but my father's God, right? So here we have God. My father's, this is going to be just El, my father's El, or the supreme God of my father, has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father as hard as I could, but your father cheated me and changed my payment 10 times. Now that's true, right? And we're thinking to ourselves, yeah, but Jacob wasn't really very forthcoming either. You know, he got some things through ill-gotten means, and so maybe deserves it. Also remember, this is 20 years after he came back here and has been working 20 years. As I heard in a movie once, please allow that years of hard toil can cause a person to change. That's worth remembering. But your father has cheated me and changed my payment 10 times. Yet God didn't let him harm me. There's another theology there that's probably worth us talking about for a minute, and that is that just because you have ever done things that you are not proud of, that does not mean you deserve to suffer and be treated terribly for the rest of your life. Those two things don't match up. Sometimes we think that they should because of this internal ethical issue that we're having with reconciling bad decisions or harmful decisions that we've made, and therefore we punish ourselves by believing that we don't deserve anything good for the rest of our lives. That's not true, and it is also in direct contradiction to the forgiveness that we're offered in Christ for the things that we are not particularly proud of. When we continue, and this is important, when we continue to believe that we deserve to be punished for everything we've ever done, that is a rejection of God's forgiveness. That is not an acceptance of God's forgiveness. We are, in essence, saying to God, and we're not, I don't think consciously we're trying to say this. Consciously, we're probably saying, I don't feel like I am worthy of your forgiveness. But what is also being said there is, your forgiveness is not good enough for me, and I don't believe you are qualified to offer it. So when we continue to believe that we deserve to be punished in whatever capacity psychologically we decide we're going to punish ourselves, that is a rejection of God's forgiveness, not an acceptance of it. Yet God didn't let him harm me. Again, we're talking, remember how that is translated, because we're about to talk about household gods too. If he said the speckled ones will be your payment, the whole flock gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the striped ones will be your payment, the whole flock gave birth to striped young. God took away your father's livestock and gave them to me. When the flocks were mating, I looked up and saw in a dream that the male goats, this is important, I looked up and saw in a dream that the male goats that mounted the flock were striped, speckled, and spotted. In the dream, God's messenger said to me, Jacob, and I said, I'm here. He said, look up and watch all the striped, speckled, and spotted male goats mounting the flock. I've seen everything that Laban is doing to you. Here again, we have the revelation, another revelation that Jacob is now communicating to his wives, that Yahweh is El. And he says that here in that, I am God, the God of Bethel. The one, remember that? When Yahweh is saying, when I revealed myself to you as what I really am, that is where you anointed a sacred pillar and where you made a solemn promise to me. Why does that matter? Because Yahweh, who is saying, I am the supreme God of all of creation, am the one who has orchestrated what has happened with these sheep. This is not something that was done underhandedly. This is something God is saying that I had orchestrated. Now get up and leave this country and go back to the land of your relatives. Rachel and Leah answered him, is there any share inheritance left for us in our father's household? Jacob thinks he's going to have to argue this with Rachel and Leah, like they won't want to leave. What he seems to not understand is that they very much want to leave. They're going to say, is there any inheritance left here? Doesn't he think of us as foreigners since he sold us and has even used the payment that he received for us? So, sold us implies what we see in a lot of the ancient Assyrian texts about marriage, that marriage in the ancient world is a business transaction. Love is not really something that is supposed to really factor into it. It is a transaction for the sake of the Bedab. And as a part of that, there is a price that is to be paid. That price is to go to the father of the daughters who are being given in marriage, but that is also to be held and then given back to them when they leave the home, or when their father passes away, or when their husband passes away, so that they have a means by which to support themselves. That is the entire purpose of the bride price that is paid. Now, Jacob doesn't pay that price in money. He pays it in time and work, right? Presumably then what Rachel and Leah are saying is that out of this work you did for 20 years, our father didn't set aside anything to be given to us when that time comes, when you die and we need to take care of ourselves, for instance. So they're upset about that. Okay, let me find my place. Thank you. Verse 16. All of the wealth God took from our father belongs to us and our children. See where that's happening? Do everything God told you to do. So Laban failed to do this, and so then God provided, is what they're saying. So this is our stuff. We're on your side. Let's go. Verse 17, so Jacob got up, put his sons and wives on the camels, and set out with all of his livestock and all of his possessions that he had acquired in Padan Aram in order to return to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now while Laban was out shearing his sheep, Rachel stole the household's divine images that belonged to her father. Scholars who write about this say that this was a thing. So going out to shear, being a shepherd is hard, right? Going out to shear sheep is something that there's an ancient writing, I can't remember which culture this was that wrote it, but it goes back to something like the 7th century BC, and says that 150 men were too few to shear a normal-sized flock. 300 to 400 men would take a minimum of 3 days to shear the whole flock, which is why Laban is out there doing this right now. Now, while he was out there, Rachel stole the household's divine images that belonged to her father. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not sending word to him that he was leaving. Have you made the connection? Laban is an Aramean, right? He is a relative of Isaac, or relative of Abraham, and subsequently a relative of Isaac. But the fact that he is an Aramean means that the language he speaks is Aramaic. So the language that develops on that tree, that branch of Aramaic and Hebrew, is the evolution of the same language separated by distance with the movement of two members of a generation of the family, right? Abraham is here, Laban is over here, they're related, and if you go back far enough, those languages are the same. But regionally, those two families end up getting separated, so Aramaic develops and Hebrew develops, and they're essentially a very similar language that just the dialect changed over time in different places. Just wanted to point that out. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not sending word to him that he was leaving. So Jacob and his entire household left. He got up, crossed the river, and set out directly for the mountains of Gilead. Why did Rachel steal the household gods, right? Now remember, we're talking about, in large part, a belief in the same pantheon, okay? Now, they have different beliefs about that pantheon by this point, but they're believing kind of in the same general thing. These household deities would be considered, later they will be called daimonia, which will get translated to demon. Originally, that word did not denote an evil presence. It could have been a protective or a malicious presence in their understanding. But it was a relative to a lesser being in their pantheon, a spiritual being, that was connected to that family. And keeping those beings happy would make them protective. Upsetting them would make them malevolent. That was kind of the way that worked. But why does Rachel want to steal the gods, the household gods? These are just little images used for divination. Was it out of spite? Most scholars believe that there's an ancient series of writings too that talk about how the part of the inheritance that is passed on to the firstborn, remember the firstborn gets the majority of the inheritance, are the household deities or the images used to represent them. And so the passing on of those deities denotes that you are the patriarch of the next Bedab. So a lot of scholars believe that she is upset for sure, but trying to secure a place for Jacob in her father's household as well. Oddly enough, those deities have to be bequeathed, not stolen. But most scholars think that that's probably what her intent was when she did that. Some say she may have been trying to gain their protection for the journey, but they've already been offered the protection of Yahweh, so most scholars don't think that probably is why she did it. 3 days later, Laban found that Jacob had gone, so Laban took his brothers with him, chased Jacob for 7 days, and caught up with him in the mountains of Gilead. Okay, the distance from Haran to Gilead is about 350 miles. That means they would have had to travel about 35 to 40 miles a day. He's traveling not only with his wives and some of his children, but also with a large number of his, let's say, servants or people, and then the livestock necessary to support them. Now, I served in the Army, and I can tell you that the average road march pace for an Army infantryman is about 4 miles in an hour. You can push that up to 6 miles in an hour if you're willing to run. For instance, that's kind of the standard in some of the special operations units. But for a regular infantry unit, standard is 4 miles an hour. It is hard to walk that fast for that long. The longest road march movement that I ever did without stopping was 27 miles in one stretch. And that took the better part of a day. And that was with our entire unit. That's on a road, right, where the traveling is easy. When we traveled through the woods, we would typically go maybe 7 to 8 kilometers before we would have to take a break. And that is, you can go about 1 kilometer an hour through dense vegetation. It's hard, it's really taxing, it's tiring. And while my expectation is that the terrain that they're walking here is probably not, something like you would find in the jungles of Panama, you're also not talking about these people walking on asphalt roads either. So you're talking about a pace, particularly with that many people. I've never been in an infantry unit that had to move a herd of cattle with us while we walked. I can't imagine doing that, moving 35 to 40 miles in a day with what they were carrying. So because of that, most scholars think that is not to be taken literally and have no idea why that number is there. It's very unlikely they were moving that fast, but nonetheless, they caught up with them. That night, God appeared to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream and said, "Be careful." Now this is God, right? Laban is understanding this as what you and I would call El, or El Shaddai, the most powerful of the gods. "Be careful and don't say anything hastily to Jacob one way or another." Laban reached Jacob after Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains. So Laban and his brothers also pitched theirs in the mountains of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done?" Now he's about to make an accusation. He's going to turn essentially from, paterfamilias, the head of the household, patriarch, into a victim who is levying a charge against Jacob. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You have deceived me and taken off with my daughters as if they were prisoners of war. Why did you leave secretly, deceiving me and not letting me know? I would have sent you off with a celebration with songs and tambourines and harps. You didn't even let me kiss my sons and my daughters goodbye. Now you've acted like a fool, and I have the power to punish you." All right, so no, Jacob didn't steal Laban's daughters. They went willingly, and Jacob had offered the agreed upon bride price for the marriage. So none of that charge is just kind of patently false. The other charge about deceiving him is going to move into a conversation about the sheep and the goats and what he's left with. But this idea that he didn't even let him kiss his sons and his daughters goodbye, there's kind of an old tradition there where there's like a celebration, and the songs and the tambourines are referenced more than once in some of the ancient texts as a normal way to send people off. The problem is that Laban says, "I would have sent you off with a celebration with songs and tambourines and harps." No one who's been a part of this story, and we're supposed to catch this, would believe that Laban was going to let them go. Jacob has already tried to leave more than once, and Laban has undermined everything that he has done to try to make sure that he stays there. So there's no way that anybody believes that Laban's intentions were that. However, your father's God told me yesterday, "Be careful and don't say anything hastily to Jacob one way or the other. You've rushed off now because you missed your father's household so much, but why did you steal my gods?" The last charge. Jacob responded to Laban, "I was afraid and convinced myself that you would take your daughters away from me." That is considered a reasonable defense, that he's responding here and saying, "I was afraid." We wouldn't probably see that as a very good defense, but it was a commonly used defense in Jacob's world. And so he's kind of starting with that to build his larger defense. He says, "Whomever you find," he doesn't know that Rachel's taken him yet. And there is a belief that it's possible that to steal sanctified images in the ancient world carried with it the penalty of death. That's really not something we should probably extrapolate from this, but it is what Jacob offers. So he says, "Whomever you find with your divine images won't live. Identify whatever I have that's yours in front of your brothers and take it." So in front of the people you've brought with you, they are the witnesses, and take it. Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen. Laban, presumably believing that Jacob is the perpetrator, went into Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, and her 2 servants' tent, and didn't find them. So he left Leah's tent and went into Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the divine images and put them into the camel's saddlebag and sat on them. This is in the religion that is developing amongst the Hebrews, the descendants of Abraham, is properly called Yahwism. That is the name of the religion. It'll evolve and get other names over time. We'll call it the religions of the Hebrews or of the Israelites. We'll call it Judaism eventually, but properly it's called Yahwism. And the Israelites, Abraham's descendants, are not the only people who practice Yahwism. The Samaritans also practice Yahwism. Their disagreement is not over anything other than which mountain was sacred. That was it. So Yahwism is not confined to the Hebrews, and that's important to know. But here's the thing. To anybody who practices Yahwism, that's going to be an affront. And this probably would have come off as a little sarcastic to anybody hearing the story. This is the only instance of God napping in the scriptures. So there's an idea here that gods can be stolen, right? And not only can they be stolen, but they can be sat on. And not only can they be sat on, but what Rachel is about to use as a defense is that she is in that part of her menstrual cycle and therefore can't get up, right? The laws of Leviticus 15, if you want to look at this, it's Leviticus 19 through 33, that talks about how anything that a man touches that has been touched by a woman during that particular part of her menstrual cycle makes him unclean. There's a whole list of rules about this, right? Have those laws been fleshed out yet? No, they will be eventually. They haven't been fleshed out yet. But there's a strong belief that those Levitical laws have their origination in the ancient practices of those people, which means they likely already believe that. So what somebody's getting when they read this is, first instance of God napping, they can be sat on, and they're being sat on by Rachel, who is saying that she is in this particular part of her menstrual cycle. That would have probably come across as a little bit humorous to anybody who was reading it at the time. Okay. Verse 35. Rachel said to her father, "Sir, don't be angry with me because I can't get up for you. I'm having my period." He searched but couldn't find the images, right? So she's got them protected. Jacob was angry and complained to Laban. Now Jacob is going to move. He's kind of turning the tables and not allowing Laban to be the victim anymore. Now he's levying charges against Laban, saying, "What have I done wrong, and what's my crime that you've tracked me down like this? You've now felt through all of my baggage, and what have you found from your household's belongings? Put it in front of our relatives, and let them decide for us." So what he's calling for now is a proper trial. Now he's saying the other people who are present, because a proper trial would involve an accusation made by one person to another person, and then a third-party group as witnesses, and they have standards and protocols they have to follow if they do that. So Jacob is now the equivalent of making a motion on the floor or something like that of a conference. He's legally asking for a trial. Laban doesn't want to do that at all, so he's going to try to get out of it. But before that, Jacob will say, verse 38, "For these 20 years I've been with you, your female sheep and goats haven't miscarried, and I haven't eaten your flock's rams. When animals were killed, I didn't bring them to you, but took the loss myself. You demanded compensation from me for any animals poached during the day or night. The dry heat consumed me all day, and the frost at night, and I couldn't even sleep." Being a shepherd is very hard. It is the responsibility of the person who's assigned to the flock to make recompense for any of the flock that they lose to anything other than a raid. So what he's saying is, I did this, and if something went bad with your flock, I took from my flock to compensate you for the loss in your flock, okay? "I've now spent 20 years in your household. I worked for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my pay 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the awesome one of Isaac," interestingly, in the ancient text, that actually translates to the dreaded one of Isaac, or the one Isaac dreads. And scholars have talked about that for probably as long as scholars have been talking about this, because it can be read in so many different ways. Most scholars believe that Jacob is trying to say that in a way that will remind Laban of the warning that he received from God not to cause any harm. "Had not been with me, you'd have no doubt sent me away without anything. God saw my harsh treatment and my hard work and reprimanded you yesterday. So now Jacob has levied charges against Laban. Laban responded and told Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. Everything you see is mine, but what can I do now about my daughters and about their sons? Come, let's make a treaty, you and me, and let something be our witness. Everything he said there is patently false. He actually has no authority based on any of their laws over either of his daughters anymore or anybody that came from them or the flocks that he's given in payment. So mostly that's probably a statement of frustration and exasperation. So now he's trying to turn the tables again by saying, you know what, let's make a proper treaty. Jacob essentially gives him the silent treatment. He takes a stone and sets it up as a sacred pillar. Said to his relatives, gather the stones. So they took stones, made a mound, and ate there near the mound. Laban called it a word I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but Jacob called it Gilead. They both mean the same thing. The word I'm not going to try to pronounce it translates to something like mound of witnesses. So does what Jacob called it. Laban said, this mound is our witness today, and therefore he too named it Gilead. He also named it Mitzpah, which means something like observation, because he said, the Lord will observe both of us when we are separated from each other. Now, he calls it that, right? Laban calls it Gilead, but also Laban calls it Mitzpah, and then says, Yahweh will observe both of us when we are separated from each other. So here we get Laban acknowledging who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is, that it's Yahweh is El. But there's also a belief when a treaty is struck or cut, if you remember that language, when a treaty is cut, covenant is cut, that it has to be overseen by the deity. And so this pillar thing that they're building, and most likely, is something they believe that the deity is going to perch on and oversee the covenant or the treaty that is made. Yahweh will observe both of us when we're separated from each other. If you treat my daughters badly and if you marry other women, though we aren't there, know that God, El, or El Shaddai, has observed our witness. Laban said to Jacob, here is this mound and here is the sacred pillar that I've set up for us. This mound and the sacred pillar are witnesses that I won't travel beyond this mound, and you won't travel beyond this mound and pillar to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor will keep order between us. So Jacob gave his word in the name of the awesome one of his father Isaac. Jacob offered a sacrifice, part of the treaty process, on the mountain and invited his relatives to a meal of the sacrifice. They ate together and spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early in the morning, kissed his sons and daughters, blessed them, and left to go back to their own place. Let's see if I can get there. The God of Nahor. I'm not sure who that is. That's something I'm going to try to learn a little more about. And when I've tried to figure out who the God of Nahor is, because you've got the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, which speaks to their pantheon, but I haven't found anything reliable that states which of the gods in that pantheon would have been the God of Nahor. But what you've got there, again, properly is monolatry happening in both of these different Bedabs, whereas the Abraham's descendants believe in a multiplicity of gods, but Yahweh is their God. Nahor's descendants also believe in a multiplicity of gods, and they've chosen another one. Presumably, what I've found so far would lead me to believe that it's probably Moloch. Could be Moloch or it could be Baal, but I haven't found that for sure. All right, we're at 11:22. What questions or thoughts do you have as we've kind of worked our way through chapter 31? I don't know, and I think it predates the story here by quite a bit. I don't know if that comes out of Arabic culture or not. I'm sorry, yeah, I should have repeated that. Let me do that. The question is, the fact that they had to pay a dowry here, or a bride price, is that where the idea of that came from? Certainly it's biblical, but you also see the same practice in a whole series of other cultures that had no Christian contact when the practice originated. You see something similar in the Norse cultures. You see something similar in Native American culture. Sorry? Oh, East India, yeah. See something similar there. So where did that practice originate? I don't know. It falls into the category of one of the practices that is congruent across cultures and time, which means that there's probably a point of origination there with that earlier prehistory that we don't have access to. That's what I kind of presume. Needless to say, it's been around for a pretty long time. Pretty long time. It's a good question. Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay. Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of questions. First one is, did they believe, we're talking about monolatry, did they believe that every time they moved or broke apart, the Bedah broke, that they had to pick a different god? No. And in fact, while it is certainly possible throughout most cultures for people in a polytheistic culture to choose which gods they will give their fealty to, it's probably the best way to say it. Sometimes polytheism would say you're going to honor a multiplicity of gods. Monolatry would say you're going to believe in these gods, but this is the God you're going to give your fealty to. And there are cultures where it is your choice to do that. But what you see here in the scriptures is the opposite, the revelation of that God to the people group, saying, I'm going to be your God. And that's what we see with Yahweh, for instance. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people. See something similar with the inclusion of Asherah later with that too. So with the history of the god of Ner, I would like to learn more about that. There's likely a revelation there at some point in that history, and I don't know that it's recorded anywhere, but I would like to know more about it. But to answer your question, no, there's not kind of an ethic where you move and have to select another god. There was kind of an ethic that there are a whole bunch of gods until one God said, I'm going to be the one for you. So the movement from polytheism to monolatry was more of a, in this culture, it was originated by the God that revealed that God's self to you as the God of your people. And that does differ from some other cultures, which is why we get the, what is the name of it? The historic preamble, where Yahweh continues to say, I'm the God of your fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The idea here that is different than some of the other, even some of the other Mesopotamian or later Babylonian cultures, the difference here is that in this story, God works on behalf of the people and then reveals to the people that God has been working on their behalf because God has chosen them. So it's a kind of an opposite thing. I will choose you, but you should also choose me. The second question was, I think, relative to the real presence. Is God present at an altar or in the idols that are made in the image of that God? And that belief certainly is a part of a great many cultures, and it would have been a part of this one as well. So what you're seeing here is a belief that those, the gods that she took actually embody the gods, or that it is probably a conduit is a better way of looking at that. It's a conduit that leads to the presence of God, of that God in that place. So when we talk, for instance, about when we use the word invocation, that is a word that would have applied to what they were doing in this time more so than what we're doing now. And here's the reason. Right now, we believe that God is omnipresent, right? God is present all the time. I don't need to invoke God because God is already here. When in this culture, and according to the belief system, I'm going to build a pillar like this, and that pillar that God is supposed to perch on to oversee the treaty is something that invokes God's spirit. There's also a belief in this time that to speak the proper name of the God is to either invoke that being or also, according to some versions of that belief, to exercise a level of control over that being, which is one of the reasons why you probably heard that ancient scribes didn't want to write the word Yahweh, because that is rooted in the belief that to write it or to speak it is to attempt to have a level of control over that spiritual being, and they didn't like that. Long answer to a short question, but it's a good question. He adds the, right, so the question, if you're watching, is they create this mound, and Jacob says, I won't go further than this mound, you don't go further than this mound, but then he says, you don't go further than this mound to do harm. So it is okay for him to do that. Now that, to answer your question, he is talking about Laban being able to go back to his home and not pursuing Jacob and his family further for the purpose of causing harm. And that leaves open the possibility of visits for other reasons, but can't cross that to cause harm. And what they're saying there is Yahweh will watch us when we're alone and will know our intentions, and if I'm crossing this mound for the purpose of causing harm, ostensibly we'll be punished for that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. So the question has to do, if you're watching, with the status and role of women, particularly as property in this time. But then Jacob goes and seems to try to convince, and he's not seeming to, he is trying to convince Rachel and Leah to be okay with this. So part of, and so the question is that unusual? Was that a break from tradition? No. The degree to which, let me say this just as a disclaimer, that no human should be property of another human, period, in any capacity, right? I think we agree about that. But let me talk about the historical context of this. And I always want the disclaimer so that no one is like, Matt doesn't think people should be property. But here's the historical context. First off, this is normal for them. Should it have been? Probably not, but it was normal. And by that I mean, there are ways, when you're talking about people being property here, it wasn't just, and I don't mean this to negate the status of women in that time, but it wasn't just the women who were property. Everybody was the property of the patriarch. Every single being in that Beidab was property of the patriarch. So the patriarch had complete and full authority over everybody and everything. Now, that doesn't discount the fact that the men in that culture had more rights than the women in that culture, in spite of the fact that the patriarch, had ultimate authority. That doesn't discount that. But understand that what you're talking about there is a culture in which everybody is the property of the patriarch. Their reasons for that are a result of evolution of their culture. But essentially, you've got this one person who is making the final call about everything. But that doesn't mean that in every Beidab, that patriarch, what would be the right way to say it, ruled with an iron fist in all areas of everything. A wise patriarch sought advice from the other members of the Beidab, particularly the patriarch's wives. And in this case, you see Jacob wanting them to be on board with the decision that he's making, because his authority over them is not authority in the sense that they are slaves of his. It is in the sense that he's the one who makes the decisions about the family, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't actually have a relationship with other people in his family too. So you've got a complex structure there in which, yes, this person is in charge, and given our understanding of how those dynamics are certainly not healthy, and I'm glad we evolved away from them, what they're seeing is this is the person who is in charge. doesn't mean this person has no love in his heart for anybody, doesn't mean this person isn't going to seek advice about making decisions, doesn't mean this person doesn't want the other members of his family to love him. It just means the burden of choice ultimately rests upon his shoulders. That's how the patriarch functions. Now, like any patriarchy, you can have loving and kind patriarchs, and you can have terribly, horribly abusive patriarchs, and probably everything in between. So what I think you're seeing here is an example of the fact that Jacob wants Rachel and Leah to be A, a part of the decision-making process, and B, to have a good relationship with him as much as is possible within the context of the way their world works. So I think is it unusual? No, I don't think it's unusual at all for that time and place. I think what we're supposed to be seeing there is an example of the fact that Jacob values Rachel and Leah's relationship there. But they're also, I would say, right, wrong, or indifferent, living within the confines of the construct of their culture, which takes the Holy Spirit a long time to change, and doesn't let anybody off the hook for anything that they do to another person that is unhealthy or harmful. Yeah?
Do you think it's possible that Rachel took all those gods and settled in particular that she wanted them to go into her new household to protect the new household?
Possibly. I know that question has to do with why Rachel took the gods. I'll tell you what I actually think. And this is just me. There are a lot of different scholarly theories, and in reading them, this is what I personally think. I think this is meant as a moment of brevity in the story, kind of a, ha-ha, I'm getting back at you sort of thing, and also am doing some things with your gods that would be considered disrespectful in a humorous way. I think that's personally, I think that's the intent. I think it's a little bit of brevity in the story that would make people chuckle a little bit when they read about it, you know. Laban was, for instance, Laban kept being disingenuous and kept pulling one over on them, and so what does Rachel do? Well, she kind of pulls one over on him too, and they're all supposed to go, ha ha ha, you know. I think that's really what's going on there. Is it possible that she wanted these gods to protect her family? That depends, that is possible, and it depends on the degree to which she is polytheistic herself. Because she could very much say, you know, obviously the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is Yahweh, is watching out for us, right? That just continues to be a thing and continues to prove that over and over. But if she is more polytheistic than monolatrous, she may be thinking to herself, yeah, it can't hurt, you know, to have a little more protection. That's certainly possible. It just doesn't tell us. Yeah. Inheritance, yeah. Yeah, the problem, so what she said is, in the biblical notes, in ancient texts, there's a belief that possession of the household gods solidifies you as the highest leader in the power structure and gives you claim over property. All of that is true, save for the fact that those gods have to be bequeathed to you, according to those ancient texts. You can't steal them. And actually here, there are two words that are used for steal. Ganab and gadzail are the two words, Hebrew words, that are used to say steal. Gadzail is to either steal with force, which is how it's used, or to steal from a foreigner. Ganab is a word that is used to mean that you took from someone close to you. And it is ganab that Laban uses when he's levying his charge, which most believe, and I agree, is meant to make Jacob feel bad. Why did you take something from, you know, somebody in your family? What kind of an awful human being would do that kind of a thing? So Laban is trying to lay it on pretty thick, knowing that these gods were not bequeathed to Jacob. Jacob knows that too. Jacob wouldn't, I mean, according to the story, Jacob's not going to go and take the gods because there's no legitimation of his power or authority. If he takes them, they have to be given to him. Wouldn't make any sense. And it's because of that a lot of scholars have taken a look at that. I can't remember the name of the person who first wrote about that. I just read it the other day. But a lot of scholars have looked at that and been like, that's probably not the case. It is possible that Rachel just didn't know or understand that those gods had to be bequeathed instead of taken. Maybe she just thought that whoever had them had the power, and some of them have said that. But at the end of the day, those are kind of the primary theories about why she did it, and the scriptures really don't give us any insight into that. It's just one of those things. Yeah, fire away.
Does Jacob ever find out that she has those gods?
I don't remember.
Later on in Genesis?
Rachel dies pretty soon. I don't remember. I don't remember if he ever finds out or not. I'll have that answer for you by next week. I don't think he does. I don't think he does, but I don't remember for sure. That's a good question. Now I'm curious. So I'll probably know that by the end of the day. All right, friends, you're asking some awesome questions. Do you have any others? A lot to think about. And one of the things that we keep seeing that may not have been as obvious in other readings of Genesis that you've done is that the status and role of women is a dominant theme throughout the entirety of the book. And understanding that in the context of our faith is something that is admittedly a challenge, and it should be. So we'll keep talking about it because it's going to keep happening over and over again. We're about to, in the next chapter, Jacob is going to confront Esau again, and that saga will last for a couple of chapters. And then we'll continue to move on through the rest of Jacob's story and eventually into the story of Joseph. For now, let me pray for you. God, we're grateful today for the opportunity to be together, to study, learn, and grow, and to embrace whatever it is that you would ask us to continue to process so that we might know you better. I pray that you would think through things together with us, and I pray that you would guide us as we leave here so that the love that we receive from you, that is in the process of transforming us, is a love that we will be able to freely share with the others whom we will meet. All of this we just ask in your name. Amen. I found out that one of our